for yourself, Colin.
Let's talk about the film. Nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars. Extremely close and extremely loud and incredibly close. It's such a tricky title.
It's an annoying title, and a title, I mean, obviously every critic, there are already hundreds of critics who have, written extremely something and incredibly something else. In The Guardian this morning, in fact, I refer you to extremely contrived and incredibly preposterous, which was their review. All I'll say, it's from a very, very interesting novel by Jonathan Safran Foer, which was about, he's an American, kind of quirky American writer, and it's about a 9-year-old who loses his father during September 11th attacks. And the whole novel, I checked out the novel, I haven't read it, but I had a look at it in the bookshop the other day, and it's written from his point of view. So it's written in this very kind of interesting, quirky, unusual 9-year-old boy who's hyper-intelligent, and he may or may not have some kind of condition, but you don't really know. It's kind of left a bit vague.
It's Asperger's.
Well, it's not spelt out. So there's one line in the film where he's asked, have you got Asperger's? And he says, I've had tests, but they're inconclusive. So it's left a bit vague. So he's lost his father, and he's trying to, and he finds a jar basically in his father's wardrobe. So when he's looking into what has gone on in the aftermath of the whole thing, and he finds this jar, and in the jar it breaks, it drops it, and it breaks, and there's a key in there, and it's a key to someone's locker or something or other addressed to Mr. Black written on it. So he embarks on this odyssey through New York, trying to find all the people who are named Black in the greater New York area, all the 5 boroughs, literally goes and tries to track them all down, shows them the key and says, do you know anything about
and
this
hoping
thing?
they're not ex-directory.
Of course, all of that, yes, hoping that. Meanwhile, his mother, who's still alive, played by Sandra Bullock, his late father's played by Tom Hanks. You see a bit of flashback stuff with Tom Hanks. His mother's played by Sandra Bullock, and she's kind of seems to sit there and let him do all this, go out and go to New York, go to the 5 boroughs, this little 9-year-old kid. Yeah, fine, leave him to it. And then they throw in the kind of middle chunk of the film, he starts by going out on his own in New York, which is astonishing. Then this mysterious old guy, played by Max von Sydow, comes on the scene, who lives opposite with his grandmother. And you don't quite know, is he his grandfather, isn't he? You don't quite know. It's left a bit mysterious. He starts going with him on this odyssey to New York to try and find these people called Mr. and Mrs. Black. And as we'll hear from this clip.
Grandma had rented a room to a man 3 weeks after the worst day.
Why is the renter's door always closed? And why can I never meet him?
He likes quiet.
Why can't you tell me anything about him?
He's someone I knew in the old country. Now play.
How long will he be here?
He never stays any place for long.
Is he dangerous?
If you ever see him, don't say anything. He can get very angry. Now, play.
Yeah, so the Max von Sydow character is only known as the renter and doesn't speak. So she was introducing him there, and he's gone through some kind of trauma, refuses to speak. So he writes everything down on little bits of note paper. He has a notebook with him at all times. And there's a whole chunk of the film where they're together, and he's writing all these things down, and the little boy is reading them, and they kind of find out a lot about themselves. Now, I'm going to say it now, I rather liked that bit of the film. So there's a third of the film, because Max von Sydow is a legend.
He's got an Oscar nomination.
Got an Oscar nomination for this role.
He's the third actor to be nominated this year for a role in which he doesn't speak.
Exactly. And he is phenomenal. His expressions are wonderful. His interactions with the child are beautifully done. And you actually believe that he might have got to the position where he just wants to write stuff down and doesn't want to speak for whatever reason. I was rather involved in this chunk of the film, mainly because of Max von Sydow, who is absolutely fantastic, and I think fine that he's nominated for Oscar, even though he doesn't speak. It's the rest of the film that's the problem. And, first of all, you have to deal with this key plot point that this 9-year-old boy is allowed to walk around New York, all the different areas of New York, on his own, and you can't quite work out how. And again, there's a big plot development late on in the film which deals with that. And it's completely ridiculous. So again, we can't spoil it, but it's absolutely absurd. And it just doesn't make any sense. So there's all kinds of elements of the film that just don't make any sense on a level of believability and credulity. on top of that, there's the incredible cloying sentimentality of it. Now, we talked about Warhorse, and we talked about whether, you'll go along with the sentimentality of that film and the emotion of that film. Now, I think people often criticise Spielberg for all of that. I think he is the master of it, actually. Of course, films like E.T. particularly. Sure, every now and then he goes too far, and I would agree with that. For me, he didn't go too far in Warhorse, and I was sobbing, for much of that film. This film tries to be. Stephen Daldry did a great job with Billy Elliot. It tries to have that kind of deep emotional connection. And of course, any film about a little boy dealing with the death of his father, you'd think would be hugely affecting. But you're just not affected and moved by it at all, partly because the kid is incredibly annoying. And actually, even in the book, reading the bit of the book that I did, it's an annoying voice in the book as well. So it's actually quite accurate. This film was found this hyper-intelligent young boy to play him. I think they found he was taking part in an American quiz show. So it's quite interesting that's where they got him from. He's clearly a very clever kid, and he does all he has to do. It's just intrinsically an irritating character.
You haven't mentioned the most irritating aspect, his tambourine.
Oh, yeah, he brings his tambourine wherever he goes, yeah. So there's all these quirks thrown in. I've got all these quirks. I might be a little bit autistic. I'm playing the tambourine. I'm going out on my own. I'm doing all these things. I say incredibly long words all the time. It's very contrived, very forced, not at all believable, and striving all the time to really move you. And it's just irritating and annoying. And yet, the Max von Sydow bit I did like. So I like it, I think, probably more than most critics who find that, it gets 1 star in The Guardian, that Guardian review I mentioned. And we'll hear what Nigel's about to say in a minute. I kind of liked that one bit of it. But so within this 2.5 hour, however long it is, film of unrelenting misery in a way is a chunk, 45 minutes that are pretty good.
Well, Stephen Daldry has the most incredible record at the Oscars. This is his 4th film. The previous 3, Billy Elliot, The Hours, The Reader, he was nominated for Best Director, and now this gets nominated for Best Film.
Yeah, it's the kind of film that gets nominated for Best Film. You've got to remember, of course, that there are now 10 in that category, whereas previously there would have been 5.
Only 9 this time.
Oh, 9,
yeah,
is it?
Just to be annoying.
Okay, just to be infuriating. Let's suffice it to say, had there been 5, this would not have been one of them. This is the kind of project where you take a book which is intractable, you take a book which is told in the first person by an 11-year-old boy, and you could see how that would work in the book, because the boy is always drawing little diagrams and maps and stuff like that, and
which are in the book.
Which are in the book, and which you can imagine as a sort of device there. Within the context of the film, they don't work. And of course, the whole thing that is kind of at the background of all of this is that the worst day, which he refers to in the clip there, is 9/11. He lost his father, Tom Hanks, on the day that the Twin Towers were destroyed and all of those other people died. And in fact, the film starts with an image of somebody having jumped from the building, which is a very controversial image in itself, because that part of the history of that event has been to some extent erased or airbrushed from history. So there's a huge kind of responsibility here to all of the people who had relatives in that building, to all of the children who lost parents in that building. And I think the problem is that to some extent Stephen Daldry feels that too much. He had all sorts of focus groups with people who had special interests, and what he seems to have done is to sort of tone it all down in a way that makes it really rather sort of stodgy and sentimental and annoying. And what you needed was something very bracing. You needed it to see it from this boy's point of view, but not for it to be sentimental, but for it to be, in a way, almost matter of fact, because the boy doesn't have any emotions. He is, in fact, socially incompetent. And one of the reasons why his father, played by Tom Hanks in the flashback scenes, is such a clever man is that he understands that the boy is not going to get through life because he doesn't have any social skills. So he creates all of these little projects for him to give him some reason to interact with the world, which he wouldn't otherwise do. And you need more of that, but it just doesn't happen. And poor old Sandra Bullock, who just spends the entire film grieving and telling the boy off for going out on his own, and where has he been, and why has he come back late, and why isn't he doing well at school, and how come he's always involved in this, endless projects and so on and so forth. And so there's a sort of sense here. And of course the screenplay is by Eric Roth, who wrote Forrest Gump. And Forrest Gump is
and
not
The Curious Case of Benjamin Button.
Did he? Yes.
Yeah. Another lumbering tedious film.
Yes, and he has a very kind of lumbering style to him. And I personally thought, the whole thing with Max von Sydow, I personally didn't enjoy the fact that he had to write everything down for the boy. I found it increasingly irritating, and I think it's ridiculous that he's been nominated this year for this role when he's been in so many other films where he was so much better than this. And of course, there's a suggestion that the reason why he left Germany and is now a man who doesn't speak was that he was in, I think, Dresden when there was a sort of the firebombing of Dresden. So there's a hint there that he's been through something similar, and there's all this sort of importing of significance, which I just found incredibly irritating. And I do think Stephen Daldry is a good director. I personally love The Reader. I could live without The Hours and Billy Elliot, but I do think he did a fantastic job with The Reader, which